Our guest today is Rawan Damen, an award-winning filmmaker who has commissioned over 250 documentaries, including the landmark Nakba series on Al Jazeera. She is currently the Director General of the Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism Network, also known as ARIJ. Welcome, Rawan.
Thank you very much, Faris.
Thank you so much for joining us. How did your journey into filmmaking begin?
It began very early when I was a kid at home. I loved TV. I loved watching documentaries and cartoon. I didn't know at that time anything about, the language of filmmaking, the language of even close-up, medium, long. I never knew this when I was a kid. But what I knew is I love this. So I still have recordings. My mom kept it for me when I was 5 years old, doing interviews with people, guests coming to our home, my mom and dad doing interviews with them. So I think journalism and filming started very, very early. Then when I finished my secondary school, I joined Birzeit University in Palestine to do undergraduate in media and sociology. And even at that time, I didn't decide early about TV, radio, or print. So I tried everything. But then when the first documentary came, I did my first documentary while I was at Birzeit University in Palestine waiting for light, a 10 minutes documentary. I felt that this is exactly what I wanted to do. And so I did my postgraduate studies at Birzeit at Leeds University in the UK. I got a Chevening scholarship and I did it, that was 2003, almost more than 20 years ago. So I think that the official journey started 20 years ago doing documentaries.
And you went on to working for Al Jazeera and you commissioned over 250 documentaries. And after that, you became the Director General of ARIJ. So what is ARIJ and how did you transition from filmmaking to your current role?
In Al Jazeera, I worked 10 years from 2006 until 2016. I did documentaries and I commissioned documentaries. And then I started doing freelance work and training on documentary filmmaking and digital storytelling. And this is when I knew about ARIJ and I joined the board of ARIJ in 2019 and I was offered by the board the job of the Director General and I joined ARIJ as the Director General in January 2020. And ARIJ is a training organization and a network and umbrella for investigative journalists and fact checkers in the Arab world. So I didn't feel it is a very transition from doing the documentaries and investigations into training journalists and empowering them to do their own documentaries investigation and their digital stories as well. Of course, I learned a lot in the last 4 or 5 years about fundraising, NGOs, collaborations, cross-border collaborations. But I felt that ARIJ was a normal journey. When you, after 20 years, almost 15 years doing documentaries, it's time to get other people the chance to do their own work and to empower them. And there is a big need for factual documentaries and investigations in the region, whether in the digital storytelling style or in the even podcast, videocast, documentaries and films and all of that. I'm enjoying so much leading a network, despite all the challenges of leading a network on the regional level. So we work in Middle East and North Africa in all Arab countries, supporting fact checkers and investigative journalists to produce content. So our model is training by doing. You are trained by doing your own content. And then we collaborate with publishing platforms all over the region and beyond to publish this. In addition, we work with universities all over the region to train professors and lecturers on how to teach investigative journalism in the region.
Do you miss filmmaking yourself?
No, at all. My friends ask me this question all the time. I say I don't miss it. I think I did documentaries. That was a very time-consuming thing as well.
Right.
So when you do a documentary, you need to really don't think about anything but the documentaries. So I remember when doing Al Nakba for 6 months, there was no bread in my home for 6 months, which means that I didn't stay in my home for 6 months. So I was from 6 a.m. to 12 midnight at the editing suite, filming and editing. I remember when I did Owners of the Land, Ashab al-Bilad, that was a series on the Palestinians, in the 1948. For 1.5 years, I didn't visit friends at home, or I didn't go to the mall for 1.5 years, for 18 months. So I don't miss that because I did it to the maximum. I enjoyed it so much. I was saying that editing was so enjoyable for me, even more than filming, because it's where you cook the film to get it the way you want, but I don't miss that at all.
I want to come back to the filmmaking later. In terms of the work that Arij does, what would you say are the most important projects that you've worked on previously?
So Arij started almost 17 years ago and was part of all ICIJ projects, so all the International Consortium of Investigative Journalism projects, the Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, and all of that. This year, we were part of Gaza project, and I think due to the horrors that are happening in Gaza and genocide there, I think it was very important that journalists protect journalists by defending journalism. And we noticed very early that there were attacks against journalists. Journalists have been killed. It's the deadliest period for journalism ever since CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, started documenting in 1992. And we were in contact daily with journalists in Gaza because Arij trained a lot of journalists in Gaza. We trained in the last 5 years around 900 journalists in Gaza. We worked closely with 22 of them as investigative journalists and fact checkers and in-depth reports. So from very early, from October 12th to 2023, we started on daily contacts with them, and they started telling us that we have a sense that we are targeted as journalists, and that people around them, when they wear the vest of the journalism with the press, people started to get far from them because they feel that they will be at risk if they are next to a journalist. Even renting a flat with people being displaced became a problem for journalists, even getting a taxi. And so we decided, with a consortium that was coordinated by one of our strategic partners, Forbidden Stories in France. It's also a non-profit organization, supporting, continuing the stories of journalists being killed or threatened or in prison, to start investigating about whether Israel is really targeting journalists.
Right.
And this consortium ended with almost 20 investigations, 13 different newsrooms, 50 journalists. We worked 4 months, and it was launched late June 2024, of investigations that went in Arabic, English with The Guardian, French with Forbidden Stories, Le Monde, AFP, German with Paper Trails, and others. And even we published in Hebrew language to reach in Hebrew language. And so in Arabic, for example, we published 10 Arabic language stories that went more than 100 times in more than 45 different Arabic language independent publishing platforms. So I'm very proud that we did this story because the challenges on the ground were tremendous.
Yeah.
Israel and Egypt banned any journalists from outside Gaza to go into Gaza. Israel didn't want any of the visuals to come out of Gaza because it didn't want to expose the war crimes happening there. And so it was a challenge how to investigate and fact check all the content, and also talk to the journalists who are working to expose the wrongdoing of what's happening to their colleagues and to the journalists' families as well. We included media houses and offices that were targeted, and also the target of journalists in the West Bank, to also say that it's a pattern. It's Israel have been doing this, even with Shireen Abu Akleh, when she was killed and targeted, and many journalists, in the last 20 years, even CPJ did a report before the war. It was published about 22 different cases of journalists that there was zero accountability later of who killed them.
What does that mean for journalism worldwide? The fact that Israel, whilst committing a genocide, can target so many journalists with impunity?
Yeah, it's Israel is saying to the world that we don't care about human rights, about international law. Journalists are civilians and they are protected by the international law. And it's very clear since October. Very, very early in October and November, we had cases of targeting journalists at their homes, targeting journalists while they are alone and wearing the helmet and the vest. And we documented around 18 cases that were killed with drones, which means that the drone the Israeli official behind the drone can see very clearly from the drone. Specifically, drones are very sophisticated tools and equipment and weapons that they can see exactly the person they are targeting. So it's very clear to us that there was a target, and the main reason of blackout, and telecommunication, shutdown, no foreign journalists or Arab journalists to access Gaza, targeting and killing journalists, that they want the coverage to stop. They want the world not to know what's happening of the war crimes that are happening on daily basis in Gaza, unfortunately, in a very horror and horrific way.
And it's unfortunate, but whilst their colleagues are being killed in record numbers, media around the world are almost, not entirely silent, but quite timid to speak about what's going on. Why is it that they've turned a blind eye to the suffering of their own colleagues?
Yeah, that's what we said. It's not a Palestinian and Arab, it's an international journalism crisis that everybody should have solidarity with. And unfortunately, the recognition of this was much lower than we thought, and the outcry of this. I even participated in international media conferences and fact-checking conferences around the world, and even award ceremonies for journalism, that Gaza was not mentioned or barely even mentioned, which I was really shocked with, and we are talking about, global north and in capitals like DC, like London, and all of that. So I think it was a clear bias by Western media and global north media of the coverage about Palestine, Israel. If it was in any other world around the world, it would have been different. The problem was that the politics of this region and the size of what's happening and the reasons of what's happening connected to them. The silence, of course, we know the Zionist lobby around the world and its pressure on the media. When there is anything like a small story about Palestine in an American media, there is thousands, if not 10,000s of letters that are sent in an orchestra to this medium, so they will silence them and get them to have less coverage. Yeah. But the mainstream media, yes, but at the same time, the social media and the citizen journalists from Gaza reached everywhere. Yeah. So the American normal, young special generation and the Europeans, they have access now to live images, to horrific images as they are happening. So I think the blackout that, even the media tried to do really failed on the social media level.
Absolutely. What do you think that means for people who aspire to be journalists in the future, seeing the media the mainstream media rather, treat journalists this way and seeing the journalists still break through despite that?
Yeah, some journalists broke through even on their own social media platform, and some journalists managed to get their content to other alternative media. I think the question of journalism and ethics will change after this war. There is a big revolution needed. And in many newsrooms around the world, even prestigious newsrooms, there's a big discussion internally even between generations and also between different ethics. Are we really covering the story as we should, and how we should cover the story? I don't think that journalism as a craft will change a lot of the main values of it. Like, people will always need not only the raw material, but also somebody to tell them the combination of all of the story, the context, what happened, the analysis, and really getting back to the roots of understanding why is this happening and what's the wrongdoing, and also make accountability, which the citizen raw material lack at this stage. Also the fact-checked information, but at the same time there is a need for a real revolution within the newsrooms of what are the priorities, how to cover this, and why there is a silence on massacres happening on the ground and horrible things, from detention in Israeli prisons to the killing, the massacres, and also the silence of a continuous violations of human rights.
Whilst the democratization of media has spurred on independent journalists to kind of get the word out, it's also created a ground for misinformation to spread very easily. How do you view the role of social media in kind of your fact-finding and fact-checking missions going forward?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. In this war, we noticed very clearly the use of AI in the misdisinformation widely. AI-generated content that was used. And so it was extremely important to connect. We have the Arab Fact Checkers Network within ARIJ that is an umbrella for 40 plus initiatives and organizations, fact-checking initiatives and organizations from 12 Arab countries around the world. So what, around the MENA region. So what we did, we connected the Palestinian fact checkers with the Arab fact checkers with the international fact checkers through the International Fact Checkers Network on a Slack group that they can talk together and fact check things together, which was extremely important during the war because the misdisinformation and the pollution of information was extremely huge. Even it reached the American president and the White House themselves that they spoke about, images that was really complete fake and misdisinformation. So I think misdisinformation and the understanding of the malinformation is extremely important. And the problem of the social media that critical mass, sometimes it reaches the misdisinformation before any verification. Yeah. And so people still remember the misdisinformation and not the fact-checked content, even after you fact-check them. And so it's different levels. It's media literacy. Everybody should be able to verify information. That's the basic thing. Then you have the most complicated with the OSINT, with the visualization, investigation and the audio investigations, and the most complicated one of countering the deep fake. And that's also important. And it's extremely important to have pre-publication fact-checking and post-publication fact-checking. The pre-publication fact-checking is not enough stressed in the Arab media newsrooms. And so it's extremely important to have, as you have a news gathering or interview disc in newsrooms, to have a fact-checking disc in every newsroom, and also to have, with the social media, the post-publication fact-checking. And in this regard, you need also the tech giants, like Google, Meta, X, and all of that to be part of this effort of countering the misdisinformation.
We see on Twitter X that they use these community notes. Do you think these are useful in that sense?
Some are useful and some are not, because the community, it's the algorithms sometimes, and we have noticed this with the Palestinian content, how they were suppressed. So Palestinian content will be suppressed, while, for example, Hebrew language, even hate speech will not be suppressed by the algorithm and by checking by human beings. So I think the idea of standard community is a good value, but the use and the implementation of that and connecting it with the algorithm is the real problem that we are facing.
And we saw earlier during the genocide the Al Ahli hospital massacre, in which there were multiple claims contradicting each other, and a lot of different OSINT accounts would say contradicting things as well. How do we find the most trustworthy OSINT accounts, and how do we go about managing that?
Yeah, that's also a clear problem. There is the problem with OSINT, especially in Gaza, that it depended on the images of specific dates and times, and even some images were not even released from the companies who own them, which bring us really to the monopoly of the OSINT. The OSINT started as open source and it's available to everybody. Now it's not. Most of the tools you need to pay for, they are very expensive to track and do, and the images can be also very expensive and even unavailable. Wow. And that's a big problem that even, we faced in Gaza project, that imagine that we have these images for the targeting the Israeli tank of the AFP office in November in Gaza, and we have the live image from another building for the exact moment of the bombing, and we needed the high resolution satellite images from the company in the States, and we launched the project and they never gave us those images. They have the images, but they never gave it to us. Wow. And so it's extremely important to understand that we live in a new world of monopoly of content, and the idea that we were internet is for everybody, open source is for everybody, is a utopia that no longer exists.
I see. What would you say are the most important discoveries you made whilst you were carrying on your fact-checking missions?
We did a lot of discoveries during the fact-checking, mostly exposing the misdisinformation. Even in Gaza lately, there was misdisinformation in Japanese language, in Ukraine, in Georgia, connecting, Hamas with ISIS, connecting the rockets, and the issue is that it's not, the problem is when they go viral, even for things, of misunderstanding the Arabic language in those videos, because they use it in other contexts for other people. And so I think the most important that the fact checkers from the region work with fact checkers from around the world quickly and timely. The issue is not only finding the right tools and finding the right methods to do it, but when to counter that and when to publish the fact-checked information. And so we try to train fact-checkers on the pre-publication fact-checking, so it's zero mistake in the published content, because if there is one mistake, you lose the credibility, not only in this report, but for the whole media outlet. And also with the post-publication, when it comes and there is orchestrated campaigns, there are countries and even armies that are from rich countries supporting and producing this disinformation. It's not only people who do mistakes, it's an orchestrated campaign, and unfortunately the fact checkers and the fact checking organization are much smaller and they don't have a counter big campaign to this disinformation happening, because the disinformation aims to shake the trust of people in the content itself, even in their understanding, in their values, and in their belief in information, and in their even understanding of the news. Many people now get back and off from news. They don't want to watch news, and they say all the news is disinformation. That mistrust is created by those campaigns of igniting more mis and disinformation.
So you're saying this is like an actual strategy of the Zionist propaganda machine?
Not only the Zionists, many countries around the world even, they want people to get into consumers and not at all information sources, factual even information, because the perfect citizen for them is the consumer. It's not the informative, enlightened citizen that is part of the real political empowerment. So it's the Zionist project also with other autocratic regimes and regimes that really want to have the elite only in the rule without any real democracy on the ground. So I think also there's a big question now after the war about the term democracy and what does it mean? When many people around the world went into demonstrations in London, in DC, in everywhere, and said we are against what's happening, while the governments are still providing the political support, the weapons to Israel.
What would you say to those who see what's going on and, like you said, they kind of pulled away a bit and said, oh, it's all misinformation?
Yeah, it's a big problem, because as you said, you need to make an effort to verify also different sources. So I always say there's no one source for you to trust, because if you do this, you became like a propaganda. You say only trust this source. But you as a person need to have your critical thinking, your understanding of research, and to study this. And the most important that you don't go to one source or a couple of sources and say this is the truth. No, do your own work, your own homework of this, and then you will discover that it's very clear that what Israel now is doing is a full genocide in Gaza. And the genocide is targeting the whole of Palestine. It's the whole of the Palestinian project. The Zionist project itself always wanted all of the land with less people. And that's the most important. It's the full genocide. They don't want any Palestinian there. They want the full land, and they want to erase the history of Palestine. So get those people out, kill as much as you can, and then remove their traces. Because why is there the infrastructure in Gaza is hit, the hospitals, the schools, the media offices, even the graves, the cemeteries themselves. So it's a part of erasing the history and erasing the space and getting people depressed that where they will go back to.
Speaking of hospitals, we saw one of the major disinformation campaigns was regarding to the Al-Shifa hospital the biggest hospital complex in Gaza, in which the official Israeli accounts would share these well-made 3D animated maps of a so-called command and control center, and then later they would say, oh, we found some AK-47s behind a MRI machine. How do you think the Zionist propaganda machine comes to the conclusion that this sort of propaganda, which is easily debunkable, is okay to spread?
Because don't forget what happened with the United States and Iraq in 2003. And so they said all of this mass destruction weapons that Iraq had, and years later, they said we didn't find anything.
Yeah.
And there was a big war that happened. So I think for the campaigns of the misinformation, they don't care if it is easily debunked or not.
Wow.
They care about this machine of reaching out that there is this. And then now there's no Al-Shifa hospital. The whole hospital, which is the oldest and the largest and the most important hospital in Gaza. I remember our friend Ashraf Mashharawi did a big documentary from Al-Shifa hospital in the war in 2012 and 2008. He was there, he filmed from inside the hospital. There was a big machine of, Mats Gilbert, the Norwegian doctor who was there for months and years working from inside the hospital. It was the mechanism of supporting the life within Gaza City. And so the Israeli and the Zionist propaganda aim to dehumanize the Palestinians, dehumanize the places. And anything with rehumanizing this or humanizing this is the problem for them. And so they keep all the time doing those stories, even if later they are debunked.
How would you assess Zionist propaganda today? I know previously they've been known to have very influential and very persuasive propaganda. Would you say it's still the case today?
In some circles, I think they lost, but in the elite circles, they still have their way of convincing of their propaganda. Because I think propaganda for Zionists is now connected with their interests. What are their interests with the elites? And they knew, I think, in the last 20 years, there was a decline in the Zionist traditional propaganda amongst the ordinary people, and they focused on the elites, on the politicians, on the businessmen, on the people whom they believe they have the close interest with. Because they saw, even with the start of the social media, the alternative media, that slowly the new generation will find their way into the truth and into what's happening. And this, of course, escalated now with the war, but it started in 2008 and 2012 and 2014. I visited the American universities in the States in 2001. At that time, when you go into the campuses, you'll find people writing on their T-shirts, I'm a Zionist, and getting into the halls where we, as telling the story of Palestine speaking, and they will try to make problems for us and all of that. So from 2001 until now, 2024, where university campuses, they had students in the campuses telling the truth of what's happening, and they are American students from all kinds of backgrounds and classes. It's a big shift of what happened. But the issue is that is it something that we can build on? Only if we have a Palestinian project. Unfortunately, there is a Zionist project, but there is not an equivalent Palestinian project. And that's the most sad in our story. We don't have a real leadership that is taking things and getting into a political side of building on this.
What's the biggest, do you think, obstacles for the Palestinians to have a real leadership?
The Zionist project, because it's countering this project, but also that Palestinians are scattered all over the place. So not only in historical Palestine, but all over the diaspora. And they need a real ethical leadership that is capable of saying we represent all the Palestinians everywhere, which is not the case, unfortunately, until today.
Returning back to Arij, there is another campaign that you guys are working on now called The Coverage Must Continue. Could you take us through what you guys are doing there?
In October, when the war started, we reached out to our small number of, we call them Arisians, the 22 different people that we worked closely with. We know them very well. And we said, if you need anything, we are here to support. And slowly they started losing everything, like their homes, their media equipment, members of their families, even some of their kids. And some of them said, we don't want to work journalists anymore. We don't want to do this. The others said, we want to continue work, but we don't have anything, not a mobile even to write the text and the reports on, or even to film, not a laptop. So we started buying for them equipment from within Gaza, a laptop, a mobile, a camera, a small one, a microphone, small things to support. And it worked. So they came back to work. They started sending, many of them are freelancers, sending many outlets, even local, regional, and international, from those, pictures, videos, and all of that. Slowly, the campaign, got bigger because we had more requests from people whom we don't know. In Gaza, from around 2 million people, there is around 2,000 journalists. So that's the number, from juniors to advanced people. Some of them are connected with media outlets, some of them are connected with international outlets. Slowly, those were evacuated. So there is now left the local journalists, who many of them are freelancers, sending, their content. So we started getting more requests. So we opened this campaign, a crowdfunding campaign, and we reached out to partners and friends to support us buy equipment to journalists to continue. And then we found a need, because most of the media offices were damaged and they lost everything. There was no even a place for journalists to work, like workstations, the safe place for them to work. So we started building like common areas with tents and putting in their desks, computers, and all of that for journalists to start working, providing 24 hours electricity, 24 hours internet, because there was big problem of internet and electricity. And then slowly we had, we will reach the journalist to give her a mobile, to find that she and her family, they don't have food, they don't have clothes, they don't have a tent. So we started humanitarian support to those journalists. So I think the idea started very small, but then with the help of people who, and we are still continuing, we helped from October until today 220 journalists to place their media equipment and with humanitarian aid. And we have requests from more than 500 people to support them, of this. So, and we did this survey for the people whom we helped, and found that collectively they lost more than 600 of family members. Wow. Close to them. We had, at least, we had 16 people who lost, a direct one child or more from their own family. Wow. All of them are displaced. So 98% of those 200 that filled the survey are displaced. Some of them for 5 times on average, some for 20 times. Imagine you are a journalist being displaced in like 300 plus days, 20 times. Wow. And every time you continue working. And so those journalists are very courageous. I really salute them for the work they have been doing. They are under risk. They know there is zero safety for them to work. They continue working. Also, one of the journalists told us, I report about the hunger and people that are hungry. I am myself, I'm hungry, the journalist himself. And one of the journalists told us that she needs to queue for hours to go to the bathroom. So she makes sure that she doesn't drink a lot of water. So she works more hours and she doesn't go for hours to the bathroom. Wow. It's a continuous struggle of unbelievable and really not to imagine circumstances that those journalists are working with. Unfortunately, not a lot of organizations jumped to help journalists in Gaza and solidarity. I always say, let doctors help doctors, engineers help engineers, and let us help the journalists, because that's how every community should have solidarity with the others. So this campaign is continuing. We named it The Coverage Must Continue because this is what we believed should be. The coverage should continue and must continue because we believe this is what Israel doesn't want it to continue. And we try as much as possible, to buy things from within Gaza, because even the Red Cross was not able to get equipment into Gaza. You are not allowed to get a laptop or a mobile into Gaza until today. And the prices tripled, of course, because there is very little equipment that you can buy and get to the journalists to continue working.
some may say that investigative journalism is more to do with investigating after the fact, as opposed to live coverage. What would your response be to that?
Of course, I fully agree. Investigative journalism comes after the news. So when the news are done, then it comes the time for investigative journalism. You need to access the field, you need different sources, and you need different things to do on fact checking and that. But in Gaza was the exception. Even the war started in October. We never allowed any investigative journalists to do any work until February. In February, journalists themselves told us that if we don't have the evidences now and gather them and kept them, there will be no evidences later, because Israel is destroying even the evidences themselves. And so with the very, very high risk, and even this is why we didn't mention even the names of the journalists who helped us in the Gaza Project investigations, because we were very worried that they will be targeted if their names were there. So we took the lead of how to gather the information from the ground. It was very, very difficult because you don't have access to the ground. Usually as an investigative journalist, you have to be on the ground to gather this. So this is very exceptional. You have to cross-check from different, videos, images, people, sources, all of that. And even people who are giving you the information are traumatized and are under the war, and the bombs are coming to them as they are giving you this information. So it's a very, very different, unique case of doing investigations. The standard traditional way is not this at all. The standard traditional way is doing proper investigations when you are, after the genocides happen, after the war ends, But this was not the case. At the same time, we tried, our executive editor, Huda Uthman, who led our Gaza project with two of our senior editors, Farah Jallad and Firas Tawil, and they made sure with the other 50 journalists from the other 13 newsrooms to do the international standards of fact-checking. So despite the extraordinary to have the full fact-checked investigations published, otherwise there will be a new propaganda against those investigations if there is one mistake in one number or one date. And imagine the journalists in Gaza, because they are so traumatized, sometimes they will tell us, I don't remember when this exactly happened, so what time it happened. So they will go to their mobile, get the data of the image, send that, and sometimes they will be very frank and say, I don't remember. So how many people you saw in front of you? How many was it? Was it on the right, on your left? And because you are traumatized, some people say, I don't remember. And that's very, very good, because then they say, oh, talk to this person. This person was there. Maybe he remembers what happens. And so you gather a lot of information from other people. Of course, it helped also the satellite images and all of that to help. So you have the human sources, but then the satellite images and the visual forensic and the OSINT and all of that to counter-check everything.
I'd like to return to your own investigative journalism. You created many films over the years, and probably the most important film series you made was the landmark Nakba series, in which you created a comprehensive look at the Palestinian Nakba of 1948. What inspired you to create this series?
When I was at Birzeit University, 20 years old, I had a dream of doing a documentary documenting the story of Palestine. I and my sister, we did 3 books oral history when we were kids that were published in 1994, 1996, and 2000. And mostly we documented the stories of Palestinians who were kids in 1948 and how they lived in Palestine before, and also on the expulsion. So our second book was called Expulsion in the Memory of Children. So I think it was a dream for me, as originally Palestinian. I was born in Amman, Jordan, lived most of my life in Jordan, from a Palestinian originally family, and I always had this dream of doing a documentary documenting Palestine. So when the chance came with Al Jazeera in 2008, I wanted to do this thing very much. And I remember the first day when I went to the video editor to work with him, I told him, this is not a film, it's not a documentary, it will be an encyclopedia. And he was like shocked, because usually documentaries are not encyclopedia. And so I said, this will be an encyclopedia. So it was a 4 hours documentary telling the story of Palestine from 1799 until today. And at that time, I targeted Palestinians and Arabs. I wanted them to know the story in Arabic language. And so when it came out, many people said, we want it in English, that's very important. And I was like, really? Is it important for the non-Palestinian, non-Arabs? And then when it was translated to English, people started requesting it in Italian, French, German, and it was people who translated the film. It was shown in China, it was shown in Italy, it was shown in Brazil, in Portuguese, it was requested in sign language. We ended up doing it in sign language, and I found out that many deaf Palestinians and Arabs, they didn't have any content about the story of Palestine in the sign language. So it became, I think it was my baby at the beginning, doing it for Palestine and for myself as documenting the story of Palestine. The problem, I think, with Palestinians, they think they know their story. And they think that they heard it from their dad, from their grandpa, from the story of their village, their city. They don't have the big picture of Palestine. They know the story of their own village or city. The expulsion from Haifa, the expulsion from their village, but not how the Zionists made this project, how it started, why it started. And this is why even for Palestinians, many of them, when I tell them you need to go watch Al-Nakba, although it was done in 2008, still is used at schools, universities around the world. So I tell friends, you are a Palestinian, you are an Arab, you need to go watch. We know this, Rawan, we know the story of Palestine, there is nothing new. I say, just go and watch the documentary. When he or she goes and watch it, they come back, we didn't know this. And that's the problem. I think we never studied this at schools. It was forbidden to study this at schools, and so I think it's extremely important.
These are schools in the West Bank.
The West Bank, in the Arab world, in the West, everywhere.
Yeah.
The real story of Palestine is not part of any curricula in any school, and that's the problem, because then you don't know what happened, and if you want to build in the future, you need to understand the history. And so I'm very proud of this documentary. It's a pure documentary. I had historians from all over the world, the best historians in this. I gathered, it's not an investigation, it's a documentary documenting the story from all the sources, making it a visual storytelling of what happened at that time.
What would you say was your most important discovery about Zionism through this documentary?
That I think even I didn't know although I studied a lot about Palestine before doing the documentary, I was shocked that Herbert Samuel from 1920 to 1925 really put all the foundations of Israel today. It was in 1925 when he left back to London that there was 100 laws in Palestine, including having Hebrew as an official language with Arabic and English, including having segregated schools for the Zionist Jews, away from the Palestinians, whether Muslims or Christians. There were 100 laws connected to the land, to the electricity, to the schools, to the education, to the finance, to the money, to the stamps. That was for me a big discovery when noticing how much was done very early before, many things happened later. So I think we lost the battle with the Zionists on this, ground much earlier than we think of 1948. So 1948 was the result. It wasn't the beginning of our story. It was the result of what happened. And this started many centuries before. It started even in the 16th century. But politically, it started in 1799, when I decided to start the documentary until today. And I think it's extremely important to understand what happened if we want to really counter Zionism and be anti-Zionists.
Many Zionists throughout history and today would say that the Palestinians didn't exist. And they came from all over, and some even say that Palestine doesn't exist because there's no P in the Arabic language. What would your kind of response be to people who like that, or people who may think that because they don't know any better?
Yeah, the Zionists built their Zionist project on different myths, and one of the myths that this is a land, empty land, with no people, for people with no land from all over the world. That was a basic traditional Zionist myth. And so they made everything they can to say there are no Palestinians. And even killing Palestinians now is part of the same myth of dehumanizing the Palestinians. It's not that the Palestinians never existed, because they were there centuries before, but the Zionist project did not see them, exactly as today they are not seeing them. It's the same dehumanizing idea. So the most important is to start with the real facts. Palestinians were there, Palestine was there. Even the Zionist project, when they documented, they knew there is around 1 million Palestinians in Palestine in the 1920s and 30s, and they knew that they will never leave unless there is genocide and massacres. People will not leave this place. This is their homeland. You need to kill people and get them, ethnic cleansed from this place to be able to implement this project. This was reports, political reports sent to the American president at that time. Woodrow Nelson knew this. That was 1919. 1919, there was a report on the desk of the American president with those exact facts.
Wow.
So everybody knew the facts. The most important, would you implement an injustice project based on violence and ethnic cleansing and genocide? And what's the purpose of this project for the colonial, as a colonial settler, colonial project? What's the purpose of this project? And the purpose of this project is still ongoing until today. The purpose is getting Israel to dominate this region. Because now, we are sitting in Amman, Jordan, and if we like to get into our car and go to Cairo in Egypt, okay? If there is no Israel in between occupying Palestine, then we'll drive there. We'll go with our car and reach Cairo. Now we cannot do this. It's this purpose of implementing this project, this body in the middle of the Arab world, the Middle East and North Africa, was very purpose. And that purpose is still today exists. When the purpose does not exist, then the project will start to break from within.
With regards to the series, there are many clips and footage of pre-1948 Palestine that wasn't seen until you released the series. How did you find this footage?
Most of this archive is in the States, in England, and in France. And many of it is archived in big places, but not classified and not tagged. So what exactly I did is to find this archive and retrieve, saying that this is Safad, this is Bisan, this is from Jerusalem, this is 1922, and all of that. That was the real work of this archive. From, still images to videos, I saw many tagged wrongly. So instead of saying this is Balfour, they say this is Herbert Samuel, because all of that tags, was done many, many years before. Unfortunately, with the scattering of Palestine, we don't have big archive of the pre-1948. So in the 20s, in the 30s, and that was, filmed by even British, French, and American cameras at that time and kept. Many of it is muted, so with no voice, no audio. Also, I managed to find some with their original sound. Like I found one for Lloyd George in England in the 30s, in 1930, talking about how he started being a Zionist 16 years before.
Wow.
With an audio and video. So I love archives. I love digging into archives. That's, I think, the most I enjoy spending time with. So it was really, really a big exercise of trying to tell the story from the archives.
When you saw the footage of Palestine pre-1948 and maybe the bustling streets and the hairdressers and the tomato sellers, the fruit sellers and vendors, how did that feel like for you?
I was lucky to live in Palestine for a few years. I visited many places in Palestine, so I love the place. I always say that Akka, for example, Acre, is the nicest city in the world. I visited a lot of cities in global north, in Europe, in the States, and I always say that. So you know, when your homeland is occupied, when your homeland is under human rights violations, under sadness, when it's full of violence and sadness, it becomes even more warmer to you, seeing, you know, those images from the past, you know. I was born in 1979, so I didn't live, you know, that period. So when I looked at the images in the 20s and the 30s, or even in early, you know, 20th century, for me, they look very, very warm. They look, it's a country that was lost. It's a country that was stolen. It's a country that the Zionist project wanted to erase its history. So due to all of that, it has this very special emotional contact with me, and I think with many people around the world, not only Palestinians, but anybody who studied the story of Palestine. It's very sad to see what happened to those images, especially when you see, for example, in 1947, people in Jaffa or Haifa walking in the street, and you know that those people became the refugees. They were expelled from their homes, their libraries, their hospitals, their schools, their cars were stolen. And they were kicked out of those homes to be refugees. And now this is the third or the fourth generation of refugees from those people. Nobody walking at the street in Jaffa at that time knew that a few months, weeks, or even days from those images, they will be expelled out of their country.
Yeah, and with regards to the archives, you said a lot of them are located in the States and the UK and France, but a lot of archives are also located in Israel, and many of them are locked away.
Yes, until today, we believe we don't have a lot of evidences, but we have a few evidences to know that there are images, videos, not only documents, but also visual evidences in the Israeli archive that are locked, even to Israeli journalists and historians. We know that some historians got access to a few documents for a short period. That was in the early 90s, when there was some opening of archives after 50 years, but it was closed again later, and only Israeli historians saw some of those documents and images. But one day, those images and videos and documents, we hope, will be opened. And then a different story from the traditional Zionist myths and propaganda will be exposed, even from Israeli archives.
We hope to see that soon. You also have worked on other movies, of course, other documentaries. One of them is the one on the Oslo Accords, The Price of Oslo. You were able to meet with Norwegian mediators. You went to Norway, you met with them, and you also got some footage from the Oslo Accords. What was that like? And how would you say the experience formed opinions about Oslo?
So after the Nakba, I did the bitter piece about the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, and then I did Owners of the Land about Palestinians and Israel. So when I started working on The Price of Oslo, which was going to go on air on the 20th anniversary of Oslo in 2013, after 20 years of Oslo, I thought that it will be the easiest, because it's modern. All the witnesses and the mediators and people who were part of the negotiations are alive, most of them. Palestinians, Israelis, Norwegian. It's modern. It's something, it's not like Nakba. I was searching for things in 1818, So it was, I thought it's the easiest documentary I will do, because it's all clear. It's all something we are living nowadays. And then I found out that I was totally mistaken. It was the most complex. It became an investigation. It's not a documentary, because there is wrongdoing that nobody is, there's a lot of secrets in there. And in the 9 months of the negotiations, that's January to September 1993, there's not a single document, even, archived document, there's not a single image, picture, or video for the whole 9 months. Oh. And so how you will tell a story when you don't have any verified documents? You depend only on Palestinians, Israelis, and Norwegians telling the story, each from their own perspective. All of them published books Some of those books even transferred to films and theater and all of that. And all of this is a big lie.
Wow.
Everybody lies. Even in the books, there's contradictories. Like you will read the Norwegian, they will say, we met on Wednesday. The Palestinians will say it's Monday. Even on simple things, not only what they discussed in the meetings, but even in dates and days, it's all contradicting each other's. So after working a year on the investigation, the price of Oslo, I seriously thought about stopping working on the project, because I said, how I will be sure of what the story I will tell to the audience who wants facts. The audience doesn't, even when you watch the 2 hours documentary, The Price of Oslo, none of what I told you about those contradictions will be in the film. The audience doesn't care that all of them are lying. The audience wants the truth. What really happened at that time? What was the real story of this, So it was a very complicated investigation. And I spent 2 years working on this. It was also, some rare footage from Norway. We got access from the Norwegian Foreign Ministry to secret documents in the 80s between the Norwegian Foreign Minister at that time, Stoltenberg, and Shimon Peres in Israel. So I had to connect the dots to be able to tell a story that even I claim Palestinians who participated in the negotiations did not know about it.
Wow.
So it was a very complicated investigation, and I think anybody who will watch The Price of Oslo will discover that until today, there's not a single book. Like Al-Nakba film, you have a lot of books, a lot of encyclopedias, a lot of historians telling what I'm telling in Al-Nakba. But in The Price of Oslo, there's not a single book telling the story of what happened really in Oslo.
Wow. Looking back at the film Price of Oslo and the Nakba and your other films, do you see a connection between what happened, what you were documented in those films and what's going on today?
Yeah, a very direct connection and link. You need to understand how the Zionist project started, how it was implemented. Where is it? Does the Zionist project thinks that it is in the end of its project, in the middle, or at the beginning? That's the serious problem you need to understand. As a Palestinian, as an Arab, as a human rights defender, as somebody who wants to work for justice in this region and around, you need to understand the history of what happened. So I think Al-Nakba and the Price of Oslo are very connected, and then what's happening nowadays is very connected. In the last episode of Al-Nakba, I called it the ongoing Nakba, because I believe that the ethnic cleansing and genocide is continuing. And in the Price of Oslo, the last thing was how Israel utilized the years after Oslo immediately to get more settlements, more bypass roads, the settlers, how the settlers think and what they aim to do. And so I think what we are seeing today, unfortunately, is very much connected to things in the film. As a journalist, as a documentary filmmaker, as an investigative journalist, you are not a political analyst. You are not somebody who will anticipate what will happen in the future. But it was very clear to me that if we don't change our ways of dealing with the Zionist project, we will reach to what we are in today.
What do you see for the future of journalism in Palestine?
Palestine itself is under a lot of threats in all of its places. In Gaza, the infrastructure of media is very much damaged now. It's targeting journalists every single day. Even in the West Bank, we did part of Gaza project, 2 stories from the West Bank to say that it's a pattern of Israel targeting journalists. Even for Palestinians inside Israel, inside the 1948, it's nowadays is some of the worst times for freedom of expression. And so I think it's extremely important to understand that it's very, very difficult to do proper journalism from inside Palestine, and you need to get those images and pictures out and then to utilize this and make the context for it from outside of Palestine. Because journalists as civilians in Palestine are under continuous threat from the Israeli occupation.
And finally, part of the legacy that you've been able to leave behind with your films and your work is the Palestine Ambassador Project. Could you take us through what that is and maybe how people can get involved?
I thought that many of the new generation, they love documentaries and investigation, visual content, more sometimes than books and reading. So what I tried to do is to gather documentaries that I did and many other friends did around, you know, the world, Palestinians, Arabs, and even non-Arabs, and translate those documentaries, Arabic, English, and Spanish. So the same documentary, around 40 hours of documentary investigations, and even animation and drama, are translated to English and Spanish, and they are classified into like units of study. So you would like to study about Jerusalem, then you go and you watch like 5 documentaries about Jerusalem, and you go through this process. So it's an e-learning platform, free, open to everybody. Anybody can register, just a username and password, and then you watch all those films and you study through them the content, and there is a quiz at the end of each film. And the whole idea was to get access to those content of documentaries that people did, documentary filmmakers over 20 years, to tell the story of Palestine, from the West Bank to Jerusalem to Gaza to the story of Palestine, even to on the Zionist project itself.
Well, Damen, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Faris.